Before we come to the last section of our service, we pause to reflect a little bit on a little Torah with a small t. Many of you have come, as you often do, to summer services, and you know our tradition in the summer, but some of you are here for the first time, and so a word to you all, that each summer we have something we call the Summer Shabbat theme. And you've been here for many, many years. You know we're all over the map with interesting things that we think speak to us and the congregation. And this year our theme, I have to look up the official name, is The Prophets Speaking to Us Even Today. Now, it's probably not a surprise that we chose the prophets for this summer. First of all, I'll remind all of you that our Reform Judaism is named by its founders, prophetic Judaism. Why? Because the founders of Reform Judaism felt particularly linked to and called to the messages of the prophets, and in particular to the ethics that they spoke about. We see those as central to our Judaism as Reform Jews. And so for us, this idea was that throughout the summer, we'd pick a different prophet and we'd talk about that prophet. We do this from Memorial Day to Labor Day, so that's like 12 weeks. Well, there's 17 books of the prophets, so we're hitting most, but not all. And I want to acknowledge that in hearing the words of the prophet that I've chosen today, that you will hear them through your own filter. And so I'm going to share them and let you take them in as you experience them. I'll let the prophets speak to you through your own lens, and you'll gain the message that's meaningful to you, and I'm going to leave it at that. When I went to pick a prophet, I know that my colleagues pick prophets whom I love this prophet, I love this prophet. So I was like, where am I going to go with this? And I decided instead of I love this prophet, I was going to start with finding or easily pulling out one of, if not my favorite prophetic line, and then move to the prophet. Okay, and the line that I'm going to share with you that's going to bring me to the prophet we're going to talk about tonight is one that I think you all know. You may know the line, but you may not know much about its context or the prophet himself. Okay, it's a quote from Amos, and it is this quote. I'll say it in Hebrew first, and then as soon as you hear it in English, you're going to be like, yes, we know that quote. So the Hebrew is, V'yigal kamayim mishpat utstaka kenahal etan. Let justice well up as waters. You can even say it with me, and righteousness as a mighty stream. You know that phrase, right? It is from the prophet Amos. It's from chapter 5, verse 24. And this is like one of the most famous prophetic quotes, also made famous really and even more well-known because Martin Luther King in 1963 in his speech on the March on Washington really invoked this as part of his main message, like justice will come when it rolls down as waters and righteousness fills us as a mighty stream. Now, you know this quote, but really, how well do you know Amos? I'll be honest, didn't know him that well myself, okay? Who is he? Where and when did he live? And what really was the context for this message? You're curious. Okay, some of you. Okay. So before getting into Amos himself, let me give you just one important historic big picture because I think it's significant. Okay. So Amos is living in what we know today as Israel. And you may remember that the kingdom of Israel exists as a big unified kingdom for a period of time when we had one king, the famous three kings in a row, the famous ones, you know them, Saul, David, and Solomon. Okay, Israel is one united kingdom. It lives like that for about 100 years. All is well. And then around the year 930, 920 BCE, there's a split. Okay, and then we have the northern kingdom, and there's like a civil war. It's all about succession. It's all about, I don't like who you've chosen to be the successor, and we have the split. And the northern kingdom becomes the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom, the northern is called Israel, and the southern is called Judah, or in other places, the northern is called Samaria, and the southern is called Judea. So Judea and Samaria, as we know those words today by some communities. The southern community is pretty small. It's the two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Jerusalem is in it, and it's relatively stable until the end, until its fall. And the northern kingdom is different. It's much bigger, but it's also just filled with so many kings. They're coming, they're going, there's unrest, there are all sorts of problems, especially the problem of idol worship. And in order to legitimize the northern kingdom, the kings who are there, they build temples like the temple in Jerusalem. And so there are two really big temples in the northern kingdom. They're now like archaeological sites. One's in Bethel and one is in Dan. Okay, so you've got the picture here. Now Amos was, we don't know the day he was born exactly or the time, but he was born like say around 800. So now it's like almost, or 130 years since the split. And he lives in the southern kingdom. He lives in Judea. And he's a farmer. And his opening lines say that he has nothing to do with prophecy. He is not a prophet nor the son of a prophet. Ever heard that quote? That's from Amos. And to say like what happened to me was really legitimate. It's not just in the family. Okay? And according to the book, and according to other historical records, we imagine that Amos spoke his prophecy for a short period of time, maybe only 2 years, 3 years maybe, beginning in 765. So maybe he's like middle-aged, right? Okay. So Amos goes to the north to prophesy. And at the time that he showed up there, the king was King Jeroboam II. And Jeroboam was pretty successful for a long time, and he did a lot of war things and conquered a lot of land. And actually, for a fair amount of time in his reign, the northern kingdom was very wealthy and very comfortable, very prosperous, but in the eyes of the prophets, and by the way, a lot of prophets talk about this Jeroboam II, he was actually one of the worst kings ever. This wealth that was pervasive in the northern part of, in the northern kingdom, was, according to quite a number of prophets, led to societal apathy. There was really no sense during this period of time and in the north of communal responsibility, and this led to crime and injustice and neglect of the poor. Now, Amos is an older prophet to Isaiah and Hosea and Ezekiel, and all those prophets talk about the same thing, even though they come later. Also, if you're really interested, the second book of Kings talks about this too. So we have a lot of collaboration on what was going on in this northern kingdom under Jeroboam II. And among other things, the people who lived there were allowing poor people to be sold into slavery and kept there by denying them legal representation to get out of slavery. Ellie, you are shocked. I see you there. Further, another problem of Jeroboam II. He allowed the worship of the gods of Canaan in these two big temples. And, according to both Amos and the other prophets, these gods of Canaan were gods who basically did not expect their worshipers to follow any social order, who had no expectation of upright moral behavior. And so the people who were hanging out in those temples were themselves drawn to corruption and exploitation and dishonesty. So it got to this point that Amos feels compelled. He feels called by God to go to the north. He goes to Bethel and he starts preaching there. He's not popular, but as all prophets do, he's giving it all. He's confronting the issues of the day. And so the book of Amos is a collection of his sermons and his poems. He's very poetic, and his visions, all these things which took place in 2 to 3 years. And it's, is it remarkable that it feels so relevant to today? Maybe it's surprising, maybe it is not surprising to you. But let me tell you about the book. It's not that long, okay? It's 9 chapters long, and it's divided into 3 parts. The first part, which is just chapters 1 and 2, interestingly, is Amos talking about, first, all the nations that are around Israel. And he ticks them off one at a time. And when you point them, like within a pin on a map, you see they make a perfect circle around Israel. And those include places like Edom, the Edomites, the Ammonites, Moab, Tyre, and also a community called Gaza. And after Amos creates this perfect circle, he starts talking about both Judah and Israel. And in this first section, he uses the same formula. He says, and he's speaking God's words, God forgave you and tolerated you for 3 transgressions, but on the 4th you will be punished. And for every single one of these countries, Amos says what their sin is. And then he gets to Judah and to Israel and does the exact same thing, lays them out as transgressors as well. And for Judah and Israel, or Judea and Samaria, as he names them and their sins, he especially speaks about how they mistreat the poor and the downtrodden. And Amos ends this section with the following quote to the Jewish listeners. He says, "Is this the family that was once denied justice and was once enslaved in Egypt? Is this the family that God rescued from oppression and slavery?" Amos basically says to them, the party's over, my friends. God is done putting up with you. You are in transgression number 4. And then the next part of the book, Amos goes on to get specific about Israel's transgressions, the northern kingdom's transgressions in particular. And here is where we find that inspiring line about justice and righteousness. In this section, Amos is condemning the people for their many transgressions. But here, the one that is most significant is that the people, according to Amos, are going to worship God. They're going to make sacrifices. They're walking around looking, quote unquote, pious and claiming to be religiously observant. They're doing all things by the book, but, and I quote, in their workplace and their neighborhoods, they were cruel and unjust. They denied their fellows' rights, especially those who were on the fringe of the community. And he says it this way in chapter 5, just like going over these transgressions one after another. Assuredly, because you impose taxes on the poor and exact a levy against their grain, you will build houses of hewn stone, but you won't be able to live in them. You will plant beautiful vineyards, but you shall not drink their wine. For I, God, have noted how many are your crimes and how countless your sins. You are enemies of the righteous. You are takers of bribes, you who stand at the gate and ignore the cause of the needy. He goes on to say, seek good and not evil, for that is how you will live. That is how you will find God, the one you think is in your midst. Hate evil and love what is good, and establish justice inside the gates. And finally, he goes on to say, if you offer burnt offerings or grain offerings while you transgress in my cities. I will not accept them. If you pay no heed to, I will pay no heed to your gifts or fatlings. Spare me the songs of your hymns. Let me not hear the music of your lutes while you turn your back on those in need. Instead, let justice well up as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Now you know it's framing. There is a little bit more. The last section of Amos is a really tough one. Chapters 7 through 9 speak of how God will bring judgment down upon Israel, the northern kingdom. It is ominous and it is grim. And actually, because of all this, Amos is actually called a prophet of doom, sadly, a prophet of doom. Even though he has that great sentence we all love, he's actually considered a prophet of doom. And his words actually come true because 40 years after he prophesies, the northern kingdom falls to the Assyrians. Okay. But like every prophet in the Torah, and I mean every prophet, there is always some words of hope and consolation at the end. And Amos fits into this model too. He always says there are opportunities for change and that God is always waiting for us and ready to welcome us back with support and with love. And so, in the last paragraph, of the whole book, so Amos is 9 chapters long. 8 and 7 chapters are about transgression and doom and sadness. And in the last in the last paragraph, like 5 final sentences, he comes to a feeling of hope. So he says, when you get your act together, when you figure out what I'm talking about, when you let that righteousness roll down, then in that day, I will set up again the fallen booth of David. I will mend its breaches and set up its ruins anew. I will build firm as in the days of old, so that you shall possess the rest of Edom and all the nations attached to my name. A time is coming, declare God, when you figure out how to do this, when the plowman shall meet the reaper, and the treader of grapes shall meet the one who holds the bags of seed, when the mountains shall drip with wine, and the hills shall wave with grain. I will restore my people Israel. I shall rebuild ruined cities. I shall reestablish stone houses so that you may inhabit them. I shall plant vineyards, and you shall drink their wine. You shall till gardens, and you shall eat their fruits. And I will plant them up again. I will plant you on their soil, never more to be uprooted from that place which I have given you. Hope comes at the end. For me, the messages of Amos are surprisingly or not surprisingly timely. I force myself to read carefully through the entire book, which I don't think I've done since rabbinic school. And I felt that both those words of warning and criticism, as well as these last few sentences of hope, really had relevance. But I leave it to you to find what it means to you. And as the summer theme implies, the words of the prophet speak to us in our time and in our day, even though they are 2,700 years old. And that is both remarkable, maybe, at least for me, a little bit sad. But in the end, it really affirms the value and the opportunity for us to connect through our sacred text. So I don't know which prophet is next week, but come back for another opportunity to hear another fabulous quote or hear about a little or more well-known prophet. We look forward to that. It is a summer where we need to be uplifted and inspired by the words of the prophets, and I feel that Amos has given me that today.